Now we're still trying to figure out the longer term effects where some of these marshes were oiled and in some places there's no regrowth. We have endangered species. This Kemp's Ridley sea turtle in particular has had a lot of problems with fishery bycatch, among other things, and it's just coming back, and it had some more degree of mortality as a result of this. Of course, birds of various types, the deep water corals. And one of the other things, this northern Gulf area along the slope is the only area in the western Atlantic where bluefin tuna spawn. And this was coincident when they were spawning. So, and they were up in the, near the surface. So I think there's investigations to look at the impacts of, long-term impacts of those. In a nutshell, I have to move on, but our commission made a number of recommendations really dealing with the issue of safety, really dealing with the issue about how we can more effectively respond to oil spills. What are the implications when we move into frontier areas? Read the book, as it were. We have lots of recommendations to improve safety, mainly dealing with how our government agencies are organized and funded, but also the lack of R&D since the last big spill that caught our attention, the Exxon Valdez in Alaska. We started to invest in oil spill response and then stopped after a few years. We need sustained investments in that technology. And then finally, the industry needs to step up to the plate. When we had a nuclear power plant problem a number of years ago, 3 Mile Island it was called, the industry figured that it had to kind of get together to build public confidence. And they created an organization to self-police. So they have an organization that sits and they inspect power plants and they do critical audits and that sort of thing, and they hold CEOs accountable. We suggest that the oil and gas industry need to do the same thing. We also suggest that they use some of the practices that they use in the UK and Norway in the North Sea, called a safety case, which is more of a systems approach of looking at safety risks. Just to drive home the point of the problem we have, the human mortality of workers on the offshore in the Gulf of Mexico is 4 times that in the North Sea. So we have a challenge and a problem. We recommended that problem I told you about de-investment in the science. We recommended that be improved and significant investments and resources spent on the research enterprise to support decision making. And then also, like a lot of other places, everyone's trying to implement these IOOS, these integrated ocean observing systems. There's a nascent one in the Gulf. If any place in the U.S. coastal ocean needs an integrated observing system, it's here and has the capacity and the resources to do it. We have not only oil and gas, we've got fishing, we've got major shipping lanes, military, all of those things and we've got a tremendous amount of hung iron. It is platforms in the Gulf of Mexico by which serve as an infrastructure for the observing. This is just the platforms in the northern Gulf up here, which we can have this to use this to make observations and predictions, not only about oil and gas and responding to catastrophes like this, but issues about extent of dead zone, hypoxia. We have similar problems here on the shelf, and no real easy way except one annual cruise to kind of tell us how big it is or where it is. That's crazy with the technologies that we have now. More work in terms of how we respond to spills in the future, including dispersant testing protocols. The full story of this is yet to be told, and there are a number of things going on that provide information. First of all, there's a lot of monitoring, mostly by government agencies, mostly in raw data, not easily available, increasingly online though, about that was done during the spill and during dispersant applications. We have a process that called natural resource damage assessment, which is underway to kind of quantify the impacts of the spill and actually put them in monetary terms. And the law requires the responsible party to pay for the restitution of those. So that's going on. We're going to learn a lot about that. This is a highly legal issue, so we can't find out what they're finding out because they don't want to tip off the other side, and it's kind of a mess. The BP, shortly after the spill occurred, announced that it was going to commit $500 million for research on this oil spill. Now, it's spent a little bit of the money, but it's really until now that they've gotten the politics squared away, because the states wanted to control it and back and forth. And so they now have a process, and everyone there is, just like it was in bonus a few years ago, everyone's writing bonus press proposals. They're writing proposals for this Gulf of Mexico initiative funded by BP. And then, of course, the federal agencies that's responsible for this, if they ramp up their studies program, can tell us a lot more as well. One of the things this spill did is it brought attention to the longer-term problems, much like you have here in the Baltic, that are there year and year. They're massive, they're caused by humans, and we need to fix them in some way. And they include things like hypoxia, eutrophication in the northern Gulf of Mexico, but also the massive deterioration and destruction of the Mississippi Delta because of how we've levied the river and kept the delta from functioning, but also because of onshore oil and gas development. So there's momentum building to try to use some of the silver lining from this. There could well be massive penalties due to BP and other responsible parties, ranging up to $20 billion under federal laws. And the recommendation is to put this into a trust fund and use this for restoration programs that are well guided by a solid scientific program to do that. Looking forward beyond that, this is a figure that actually was produced before our report was prepared. We took it. This is a government agency which projects where our oil is coming from in the U.S. This is domestic supplies. And you can see they've declined, and they're principally declined because Alaska, the north slope of Alaska, is being depleted. In fact, the flows down the Trans-Alaska pipeline are projected to get so dangerously low that they will be inefficient to move the oil down there. So they've got a serious problem looming. And also on land, production, as you see, is declined and is projected to be level at best. So really, this scenario assumes that we're going to double the production from offshore in U.S. waters, offshore oil, which is going to be a challenge. How do we do this, and how do we do it safely? In addition to that, like here and everywhere, we're thinking about renewable energy in the ocean, both wind power, like you've got here in Denmark and other places, but also wave energy and the like. We need to think about energy in a broader way. But unfortunately, as you probably know, if you read the news at all, we've taken a crazy turn in American politics. And now we have an ultra-right majority, at least in one of our houses of Congress. And they've taken this, and I said they have amnesia because they're not getting the lessons of last year. They want to move ahead. This is a passage of a bill through the House of Representatives that would basically say, to hell with more safeguards. We want to go ahead and drill all over our coastal ocean in the United States because we need the energy, because people are worried about the price of gasoline at the pump. As if doing this would next week or next year solve that problem. So we've got a major challenge ahead. Finally, let me just conclude on this one to bring it to more northern latitudes. The future, in addition to the Gulf of Mexico, of oil and gas in the United States and the ocean, if there is any, is best on what we know whether the reserves are, maybe in the industry interest is the Alaska Arctic. Chukchi and Beaufort Sea. At one stage, they're actually less risky than the Gulf of Mexico. They're shallow deposits, lower pressure. If you have a blowout, you can send divers down to cap the well. I mean, it's not that big a deal, but you've got ice, and you've got different biota. And of course, all of this is going on where that same interest is there in Russia and Denmark and your possession of Greenland and Canada. So if any place cries out for some sort of an international approach to dealing with safety in oil and gas production, it's certainly in the Arctic. So thank you very much.
Now, if we go back to 1990, when you left this area, if you had started up a program, a bonus Mexican Gulf program, how would you have formulated your research need in order to prevent this event?
I think one of the things hopefully would have happened is a better assessment of the risks of drilling in deep water. And It was not in the industry's interest to ask too many questions about this. They were very confident that they had the technology to do this and go deeper and deeper. But there are some serious issues that no one had given the forethought of what happens if the blowout preventer doesn't work. They thought that would never happen. So that in their assessments, when they made decisions on approving these permits, the documents indicated the risk of a spill occurring that would impact the coastal area was zero. Obviously, it wasn't zero. And in addition to that, we knew very little about the operating environment in the deep Gulf, so that we didn't know the physics that drive, for example, this deep water plume. So I think if we had that, we could have had a better assessment of what are the risks, and that would have probably resulted in more attention to precautionary approaches in the drilling technologies and so on that are used. Yes.
How come Shell had 24/7 check and the BP didn't?
I think it's. I think it goes to what we've heard. We had a lot of people testify. We had the CEOs of Shell and Exxon and so on come to us. And interestingly, though, when they came to our commission, those CEOs, the ground rules were only the chairs could ask them questions. The rest of us couldn't. We weren't allowed to ask them. I was dying to ask them some questions. But I think what we learned from that and a lot of other things is that this safety culture really starts at the top. And it requires the CEOs to be very cognizant. So look at BP. You had Lord Brown was the CEO. He was the one. BP was beyond petroleum. They were the new company that was going to lead us to renewable energy, a new world, and that was their whole pitch and mentality. But that didn't translate to an operating culture. So BP had in short order a pipeline broken in Alaska that was worn out and not properly maintained, an oil refinery explosion in Texas, and then this event. So the safety culture is important. We talked to the CEO of Shell, who told us that he had just come from helicoptering offshore, where he had given an award to someone working on this drilling rig who pulled the string, basically stopped the whole process because he saw something that he was concerned about, shut the whole rig down, cost him over $1 million a day, and it proved to be bogus. It wasn't a problem. But he went out there and gave this person an award to demonstrate that they were committed to doing this. So I think that we learned a lot is that really comes from the top, this safety approach, and it has to translate down. There are lots of other oil companies that work in the Gulf of Mexico, and ones you and I never heard of, and you never heard of. They're smaller companies, and they don't have the resources or capacity that the majors do. The other thing is that the important thing is why this is an international problem. These majors work in all of international waters. So these companies who are fighting regulations in the U.S. operate under even more stringent regulations in the North Sea and do just fine, thank you. So we need to really think about this in an international way. Maybe we can start with the Arctic, but also the Gulf of Mexico. We're trying to suggest to our administration that they have talks with Cuba about making sure that there's because these sites in Cuba where they're going to drill are a lot closer to Florida in Miami than the Deepwater Horizon site was.
Okay, Don. I think it's amazing that was it the House of Representatives that actually adopted this plan to go, offshore activities to expand that, and that was in 2011.
Yeah,
which is less than one year after the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe. So does this mean that the memory of politicians is less than a year? And does this mean that that within a year or so we will pick up nuclear power again? After the accident in Hiroshima.
I think what it means. I think what it means is that we've moved into a very polarized situation, political situation, in the United States. So people are the opposition is taking a position just because it poses the president and his administration. And also using areas where they think they can make a point to the unsophisticated public and equate regulations, the need for regulations, to a cost to them of higher prices for fuel. So that's the political game that's being played. It has nothing to do with reality, but it does have to do with this larger public debate about the role of government and the role of regulation in the private enterprise situation.